The Venturers, by O. Henry. Let the story wreck itself on the spreading rails of the Sequitur Limited, if it will. First, you must take your seat in the observation car for one moment. It is for no longer than to consider a brief essay on the subject. Let us call it, What's Around the Corner? Understandi mundus and duas parties devisum est, who wear rubbers and pay poll taxes, and men who discover new continents. There are no more continents to discover, but by the time overshows are out of date and the poll has developed into an income tax, the other half will be paralleling the canals of Mars with radium railways. Fortune, chance, and adventure are given as synonymous in the dictionaries. To the knowing, each has a different meaning. Fortune is a prize to be won. Adventure is the road to it. Chance is what may lurk in the shadows at the roadside. The face of fortune is radiant and alluring. That of adventure is flushed and heroic. The face of chance is the beautiful countenance, perfect because vague and dream-born, that we see in our teacups at breakfast while we growl over our chops and toast. The venturer is one who keeps his eye on the hedgerows and wayside groves and meadows while he travels the road to fortune. That is the difference between him and the adventurer. Eating the forbidden fruit was the best record ever made by a venturer. Trying to prove that it happened is the highest work of the adventuresome. To be either is disturbing to the cosmogony of creation. So, as bracket-sawed and city-directoried citizens, let us light our pipes, chide the children and the cat, arrange ourselves in the willow rocker under the flickering gas jet at the coolest window, and scan this little tale of two modern followers of chance. "Did you ever hear that story about the man from the West?" asked Billinger, in the little dark oak room to your left as you penetrate the interior of the Powhatan Club. "Doubtless," said John Reginald Forster, rising and leaving the room. Forster got his straw hat. Straws will be in and may be out again long before this is printed, from the checkroom boy, and walked out of the air, as Hamlet says. Billinger was used to having his stories insulted and would not mind. Forster was in his favorite mood and wanted to go away from anywhere. A man, in order to get on good terms with himself, must have his opinions corroborated and his moods matched by someone else. I had written that somebody, but an ADT boy who once took a telegram for me pointed out that I could save money by using the compound word. This is a vice versa case. Forster's favorite mood was that of greatly desiring to be a follower of chance. He was a venturer by nature, but convention, birth, tradition, and the narrowing influences of the tribe of Manhattan had denied him full privilege. He had trodden all the main traveled thoroughfares and many of the side roads that are supposed to relieve the tedium of life. But none had sufficed. The reason was that he knew what was to be found at the end of every street. He knew from experience and logic almost precisely to what end each digression from routine must lead. He found a depressing monotony in all the variations that the music of his sphere had grafted upon the tune of life. He had not learned that, although the world was made round, the circle has been squared, and that its true interest is to be in what's around the corner. Forster walked abroad aimlessly from the Powhatan, trying not to tax either his judgment or his desire as to what streets he traveled. He would have been glad to lose his way if it were possible, but he had no hope of that. Adventure and fortune move at your beck and call in the greater city. But chance is oriental. She is a veiled lady in a sedan chair, protected by a special traffic squad of Dragonians. Crosstown, uptown, and downtown you may move without seeing her. At the end of an hour's stroll, Forster stood on a corner of a broad, smooth avenue, looking disconsolately across it at a picturesque old hotel softly but brilliantly lit. Disconsolately, because he knew that he must dine, and dining in that hotel was no venture. It was one of his favorite caravanseries, and so silent and swift would be the service and so delicately choice the food, that he regretted the hunger that must be appeased by the dead perfection of the place's cuisine. Even the music there seemed to be always playing un-repos. Fancy came to him that he would dine at some cheap, even dubious, restaurant lower down in the city, where the erratic chefs from all countries of the world spread their national cookery for the omnivorous American. Something might happen there out of the routine. He might come upon a subject without a predicate, a road without an end, a question without an answer, a cause without an effect, a gulf stream in life's salt ocean. He had not dressed for evening. He wore a dark business suit that would not be questioned even where the waiters served the spaghetti in their shirt sleeves. So John Reginald Forster began to search his clothes for money, because the more cheaply you dine, the more surely must you pay. All of the 13 pockets, large and small, of his business suit he explored carefully and found not a penny. His bank book showed a balance of 5 figures to his credit in the old Ironsides Trust Company, but Forster became aware of a man nearby at his left hand who was really regarding him with some amusement. He looked like any businessman of 30 or so, neatly dressed and standing in the attitude of one waiting for a streetcar. But there was no car line on that avenue, so his proximity and unconcealed curiosity seemed to Forster to partake of the nature of a personal intrusion. But, as he was a consistent seeker after "what's around the corner," instead of manifesting resentment, he only turned a half-embarrassed smile upon the other's grin of amusement. "All in?" asked the intruder, drawing nearer. "Seems so," said Forster. "Now, I thought there was $1 in." "Oh, I know," said the other man with a laugh. "But there wasn't. I've just been through the same process myself, as I was coming around the corner. I found in an upper vest pocket, I don't know how they got there, exactly 2 pennies. You know what kind of a dinner exactly 2 pennies will buy?" "You haven't dined then?" asked Forster. "I have not, but I would like to. Now, I'll make you a proposition. You look like a man who would take up one. Your clothes look neat and respectable. Excuse personalities. I think mine will pass the scrutiny of a headwaiter. Also, suppose we go over to that hotel and dine together. We will choose from the menu like millionaires or, if you prefer, like gentlemen in moderate circumstances dining extravagantly for once. When we have finished, we will match with my 2 pennies to see which of us will stand the brunt of the house's displeasure and vengeance. My name is Ives. I think we have lived in the same station of life before our money took wings." "You're on," said Forster joyfully. Here was a venture at least within the borders of the mysterious country of chance anyhow. It promised something better than the stale infestivity of a table d'hd. The two were soon seated at a corner table in the hotel dining room. Ives chucked one of his pennies across the table to Forster. "Match for which of us gives the order," he said. Forster lost. Ives laughed and began to name liquids and viands to the waiter with the absorbed but calm deliberation of one who was to the menu born. Forster, listening, gave his admiring approval of the order. "I am a man," said Ives during the oysters, "who has made a lifetime search after the to be continued in our next. I am not like the ordinary adventurer who strikes for a coveted prize, nor yet am I like a gambler who knows he is either to win or lose a certain set stake. What I want is to encounter an adventure to which I can predict no conclusion. It is the breath of existence to me to dare fate in its blindest manifestations. The world has come to run so much by rote and gravitation that you can enter upon hardly any footpath of chance in which you do not find signboards informing you of what you may expect at its end. I am like the clerk in the circumlocution office who always complained bitterly when anyone came in to ask information. He wanted to underknow, was the kick he made to his fellow clerks. Well, I don't want to know, I don't want to reason, I don't want to guess, I want to bet my hand without seeing it." "I understand," said Forster delightedly. "I've often wanted the way I feel put into words. You've done it. I want to take chances on what's coming. Suppose we have a bottle of Moselle with the next course." "Agreed," said Ives. "I'm glad you catch my idea. It will increase the animosity of the house toward the loser. If it does not weary you, we will pursue the theme. Only a few times have I met a true venture one, who does not ask a schedule and map from fate when he begins a journey. But, as the world becomes more civilized and wiser, the more difficult it is to come upon an adventure the end of which you cannot foresee. In the Elizabethan days you could assault the watch, ring knockers from doors, and have a jolly set-to with the blades in any convenient angle of a wall, and get away with it. Nowadays, if you speak disrespectfully to a policeman, all that is left to the most romantic fancy is to conjecture in what particular police station he will land you." I know," said Forster, nodding approval. "I returned to New York today," continued Ives, "from a 3 years' ramble around the globe. Things are not much better abroad than they are at home. The whole world seems to be overrun by conclusions. The only thing that interests me greatly is a premise. I've tried shooting big game in Africa. I know what an express rifle will do at so many yards, and when an elephant or a rhinoceros falls to the bullet, I enjoy it about as much as I did when I was kept in after school to do a sum in long division on the blackboard. I know, said Forster. There might be something in aeroplanes, went on Ives, reflectively. I've tried ballooning, but it seems to be merely a cut-and-dried affair of wind and ballast. Women, suggested Forster with a smile. 3 months ago, said Ives, I was pottering around in one of the bazaars in Constantinople. I noticed a lady, veiled, of course, but with a pair of especially fine eyes visible, who was examining some amber and pearl ornaments at one of the booths. With her was an attendant, a big Nubian, as black as coal. After a while, the attendant drew nearer to me by degrees and slipped a scrap of paper into my hand. I looked at it when I got a chance. On it was scrawled hastily in pencil, "The arched gate of the Nightingale Garden at 9 tonight." Does that appear to you to be an interesting premise, Mr. Forster? I made inquiries and learned that the Nightingale Garden was the property of an old Turkic Grand Vizier, or something of the sort. Of course I prospected for the arched gate and was there at 9. The same Nubian attendant opened the gate promptly on time, and I went inside and sat on a bench by a perfumed fountain with the veiled lady. We had quite an extended chat. She was Myrtle Thompson, a lady journalist, who was writing up the Turkish harems for a Chicago newspaper. She said she noticed the New York cut of my clothes in the bazaar and wondered if I couldn't work something into the metropolitan papers about it. I see, said Forster. I see. I've canoed through Canada, said Ives, down many rapids and over many falls. But I didn't seem to get what I wanted out of it because I knew there were only two possible outcomes. I would either go to the bottom or arrive at the sea level. I've played all games at cards, but the mathematicians have spoiled that sport by computing the percentages. I've made acquaintances on trains, I've answered advertisements, I've rung strange doorbells, I've taken every chance that presented itself, but there has always been the conventional ending, the logical conclusion to the premise. I know, repeated Forster. I've felt it all, but I've had few chances to take my chance at chances. Is there any life so devoid of impossibilities as life in this city? There seems to be a myriad of opportunities for testing the undeterminable, but not one in 1,000 fails to land you where you expected it to stop. I wish the subways and streetcars disappointed one as seldom. The sun has risen, said Ives, on the Arabian Nights. There are no more caliphs. The fisherman's vase is turned to a vacuum bottle, warranted to keep any genie boiling or frozen for 48 hours. Life moves by rote. Science has killed adventure. There are no more opportunities such as Columbus and the man who ate the first oyster had. The only certain thing is that there is nothing uncertain. Well, said Forster, my experience has been the limited one of a city man. I haven't seen the world as you have, but it seems that we view it with the same opinion. But I tell you I am grateful for even this little venture of ours into the borders of the haphazard. There may be at least one breathless moment when the bill for the dinner is presented. Perhaps, after all, the pilgrims who traveled without scrip or purse found a keener taste to life than did the knights of the Round Table, who rode abroad with a retinue and King Arthur's certified checks in the lining of their helmets. And now, if you've finished your coffee, suppose we match one of your insufficient coins for the impending blow of fate. What have I up? Heads, called Ives. Heads it is, said Forster, lifting his hand. I lose. We forgot to agree upon a plan for the winner to escape. I suggest that when the waiter comes you make a remark about telephoning to a friend. I will hold the fort and the dinner check long enough for you to get your hat and be off. I thank you for an evening out of the ordinary, Mr. Ives, and wish we might have others. If my memory is not at fault, said Ives, laughing, the nearest police station is in McDougal Street. I have enjoyed the dinner, too, let me assure you. Forster crooked his finger for the waiter. Victor, with a locomotive effort that seemed to owe more to pneumatics than to pedestrianism, glided to the table and laid the card, face downward, by the loser's cup. Forster took it up and added the figures with deliberate care. Ives leaned back comfortably in his chair. Excuse me, said Forster, But I thought you were going to ring Grimes about that theater party for Thursday night. Had you forgotten about it? Oh, said Ives, settling himself more comfortably. I can do that later on. Get me a glass of water, waiter. Want to be in at the death, do you? Asked Forster. I hope you don't object, said Ives, pleadingly. Never in my life have I seen a gentleman arrested in a public restaurant for swindling it out of a dinner. All right, said Forster calmly. You are entitled to see a Christian die in the arena as your Victor came with the glass of water and remained, with the disengaged air of an inexorable collector. Forster hesitated for 15 seconds, and then took a pencil from his pocket and scribbled his name on the dinner check. The waiter bowed and took it away. The fact is, said Forster with a little embarrassed laugh, I doubt whether I'm what they call a game sport, which means the same as a soldier of fortune. I'll have to make a confession. I've been dining at this hotel 2 or 3 times a week for more than a year. I always sign my checks. And then, with a note of appreciation in his voice, it was first-rate of you to stay to see me through with it when you knew I had no money, and that you might be scooped in, too. I guess I'll confess, too, said Ives with a grin. I own the hotel. I don't run it, of course, but I always keep a suite on the 3rd floor for my use when I happen to stray into town. He called a waiter and said, Is Mr. Gilmore still behind the desk? All right. Tell him that Mr. Ives is here, and ask him to have my rooms made ready and aired. Another venture cut short by the inevitable, said Forster. Is there a conundrum without an answer in the next number? But let's hold to our subject just for a minute or two, if you will. It isn't often that I meet a man who understands the flaws I pick in existence. I am engaged to be married a month from today. I reserve comment, said Ives. Right. I am going to add to the assertion. I am devotedly fond of the lady, but I can't decide whether to show up at the church or make a sneak for Alaska. It's the same idea, you know, that we were discussing it does for a fellow as far as possibilities are concerned. Everybody knows the routine. You get a kiss flavored with Ceylon tea after breakfast. You go to the office. You come back home and dress for dinner theater twice a week bills, moping around most evenings trying to make conversation. A little quarrel occasionally, maybe sometimes a big one, and a separation or else a settling down into a middle-aged contentment, which is worst of all. I know, said Ives, nodding wisely. It's the dead certainty of the thing, went on Forster, that keeps me in doubt. There'll never more be anything around the corner. Nothing after the little church, said Ives. I know. Understand, said Forster, that I am in no doubt as to my feelings toward the lady. I may say that I love her truly and deeply, but there is something in the current that runs through my veins that cries out against any form of the calculable. I do not know what I want, but I know that I want it. I'm talking like an idiot, I suppose, but I'm sure of what I mean. I understand you, said Ives, with a slow smile. Well, I think I will be going up to my rooms now. If you would dine with me here one evening soon, Mr. Forster, I'd be glad. Thursday, suggested Forster. At 7, if it's convenient, answered Ives. 7 goes, assented Forster. At 8:30 Ives got into a cab and was driven to a number in one of the correct West 70s. His card admitted him to the reception room of an old-fashioned house into which the spirits of fortune, chance, and adventure had never dared to enter. On the walls were the Whistler etchings, the steel engravings by O. Watts his name, the still-life paintings of the grapes and garden truck with the watermelon seeds spilled on the table as natural as life, and the Groy's head. It was a household. There was even brass andirons. On a table was an album, half Morocco, with oxidized silver protections on the corners of the lids. A clock on the mantel ticked loudly, with a warning click at 5 minutes to 9. Ives looked at it curiously, remembering a timepiece in his grandmother's home that gave such a warning. And then down the stairs and into the room came Mary Marsden. She was 24, and I leave her to your imagination. But I must say this much: youth and health and simplicity and courage and greenish-violet eyes are beautiful, and she had all these. She gave Ives her hand with the sweet cordiality of an old friendship. You can't think what a pleasure it is, she said, to have you drop in once every 3 years or so. For half an hour they talked. I confess that I cannot repeat the conversation. You will find it in books in the circulating library. When that part of it was over, Mary said. And did you find what you wanted while you were abroad? What I wanted, said Ives. Yes. You know you were always queer. Even as a boy you wouldn't play marbles or baseball or any game with rules. You wanted to dive in water where you didn't know whether it was 10 inches or 10 feet deep. And when you grew up you were just the same. We've often talked about your peculiar ways. I suppose I am an incorrigible, said Ives. I am opposed to the doctrine of predestination, to the rule of three, gravitation, taxation, and everything of the kind. Life has always seemed to me something like a serial story would be if they printed above each installment a synopsis of succeeding chapters. Mary laughed merrily. Bob Ames told us once, she said, of a funny thing you did. It was when you and he were on a train in the South, and you got off at a town where you hadn't intended to stop just because the brakeman hung up a sign in the end of the car with the name of the next station on it. I remember, said Ives. That next station has been the thing I've always tried to get away from. I know it, said Mary, and you've been very foolish. I hope you didn't find what you wanted not to find, or get off at the station where there wasn't any, or whatever it was you expected wouldn't happen to you during the 3 years you've been away. There was something I wanted before I went away, said Ives. Mary looked in his eyes clearly, with a slight, but perfectly sweet smile. There was, she said. You wanted me, and you could have had me, as you very well know. Without replying, Ives let his gaze wander slowly about the room. There had been no change in it since last he had been in it, 3 years before. He vividly recalled the thoughts that had been in his mind then. The contents of that room were as fixed, in their way, as the everlasting hills. No change would ever come there except the inevitable ones wrought by time and decay. That silver-mounted album would occupy that corner of that table. Those pictures would hang on the walls. Those chairs be found in their same places every morn and noon and night while the household hung together. The brass andirons were monuments to order and stability. Here and there were relics of 100 years ago which were still living mementos and would be for many years to come. One going from and coming back to that house would never need to forecast or doubt. He would find what he left and leave what he found. The veiled lady, Chance, would never lift her hand to the knocker on the outer door. And before him sat the lady who belonged in the room. Cool and sweet and unchangeable she was. She offered no surprises. If one should pass his life with her, though she might grow white-haired and wrinkled, he would never perceive the change. 3 years he had been away from her, and she was still waiting for him as established and constant as the house itself. He was sure that she had once cared for him. It was the knowledge that she would always do so that had driven him away. Thus his thoughts ran. I am going to be married soon, said Mary. On the next Thursday afternoon Forster came hurriedly to Ives' hotel. Old man, said he, we'll have to put that dinner off for a year or so. I'm going abroad. The steamer sails at 4. That was a great talk we had the other night, and it decided me. I'm going to knock around the world and get rid of that incubus that has been weighing on both you and me, the terrible dread of knowing what's going to happen. I've done one thing that hurts my conscience a little, but I know it's best for both of us. I've written to the lady to whom I was engaged and explained everything, told her plainly why I was leaving, that the monotony of matrimony would never do for me. Don't you think I was right? It is not for me to say, answered Ives. Go ahead and shoot elephants if you think it will bring the element of chance into your life. We've got to decide these things for ourselves. But I tell you one thing, Forster, I found the way. I found out the biggest hazard in the world, a game of chance that never is concluded, a venture that may end in the highest heaven or the blackest pit. It will keep a man on edge until the clods fall on his coffin, because he will never know not until his last day, and not then will he know. It is a voyage without a rudder or compass, and you must be captain and crew and keep watch, every day and night, yourself, with no one to relieve you. I have found the venture. Don't bother yourself about leaving Mary Marsden, Forster. I married her yesterday at noon. The Unprofitable Servant, by O. Henry. I am the richer by the acquaintance of 4 newspaper men. Singly, they are my encyclopedias, friends, mentors, and sometimes bankers. But now and then it happens that all of them will pitch upon the same print-worthy incident of the passing earthly panorama and will send in repertorial constructions thereof to their respective journals. It is then that, for me, it is to laugh. For it seems that to each of them, trained and skilled as he may be, the same occurrence presents a different facet of the cut diamond, life. One will have it, let us say, that Madame Andre Macart's apartment was looted by 6 burglars, who descended via the fire escape and bore away a ruby tiara valued at $2,000 and a $500 prize Spitz dog, which, in violation of the expectoration ordinance, was making free with the halls of the Wuda Pisatano Atunca apartments. My second, Cheel, will take notes to the effect that while a friendly game of pinochle was in progress in the tenement rooms of Mrs. Andy McCarty, a lady guest named Ruby O'Hara threw a burglar down 6 flights of stairs, where he was pinioned and held by a $2,000 English bulldog amid a crowd of 500 excited spectators. My third chronicler and friend will gather the news threads of the happening in his own happy way, setting forth on the page for you to read that the house of Antonio Macartini was blown up at 6 a.m. by the Black Hand Society on his refusing to leave $2,000 at a certain street corner, killing a pet $500 Pomeranian belonging to Alderman Rubitara's little daughter. See photo and diagram opposite. Number 4 of my history makers will simply construe from the premises the story that while an audience of 2,000 enthusiasts was listening to a Rubinstein concert on 6th Street, a woman who said she was Mrs. Andrew M. Carter threw a brick through a plate glass window valued at $500. The Carter woman claimed that someone in the building had stolen her dog. Now, the discrepancies in these registrations of the day's doings need do no one hurt. Surely, one newspaper is enough for any man to prop against his morning water bottle to fend off the smiling hatred of his wife's glance. If he be foolish enough to read, for he is no wiser than a higher critic. I remember, probably as well as you do, having read the parable of the talents. A prominent citizen, about to journey into a far country, first hands over to his servants his goods. To one he gives 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to every man according to his several ability, as the text has it. There are 2 versions of this parable, as you well know. There may be more I do not know. When the P.C. returns, he requires an accounting. 2 servants have put their talents out at usury and gained 100% good. The unprofitable one simply digs up the talent deposited with him and hands it out on demand. A pattern of behavior for trust companies and banks, surely. In one version we read that he had wrapped it in a napkin and laid it away. But the commentator informs us that the talent mentioned was composed of 750 ounces of silver, about $900 worth. So the chronicler who mentioned the napkin had either to reduce the amount of the deposit or do a lot of explaining about the size of the napery used in those doffs. Therefore, in his version we note that he uses the word pound instead of talent. A pound of silver may very well be laid away and carried away in a napkin, as any hotel or restaurant man will tell you. But let us get away from our mutton. When the returned nobleman finds that the one talented servant has nothing to hand over except the original fund entrusted to him, he is as angry as a multimillionaire would be if someone should hide under his bed and make a noise like an assessment. He orders the unprofitable servant cast into outer darkness, after first taking away his talent and giving it to the 100% financier, and breathing strange saws, saying, "From him that hath not shall be taken away even that which he hath," which is the same as to say, nothing from nothing leaves nothing. And now closer draw the threads of parable, precept, allegory, and narrative, leading nowhere if you will, or else weaving themselves into the little fiction story about Cliff McGowan and his one talent. There is but a definition to follow, and then the homely actors trip on. Talent, a gift, endowment or faculty, some peculiar ability, power, or accomplishment, natural or acquired. A metaphor borrowed from the parable in Matt. XXV L4-30. In New York City today there are, estimated, 125,000 living creatures training for the stage. This does not include seals, pigs, dogs, elephants, prize fighters, carmines, mind readers, or Japanese wrestlers. The bulk of them are in the ranks of the 4 million. Out of this number will survive 1,900 of these will have attained their fullness of fame when they shall dubiously indicate with the point of a hatpin a blurred figure in a flashlight photograph of a stage tout ensemble with the proud commentary, "That's me." 80, in the pinkest of Male Louis XIV court costumes shall welcome the queen of the mythical Pawpaw Isles in a few well-memorized words, turning a tip-tilted nose upon the 900. 10, in tiny lace caps, shall dust Ibsen furniture for 6 minutes after the rising of the curtain. 9 shall attain the circuits, besieging with muscle, skill, eye, hand, voice, wit, brain, heel and toe the ultimate high walls of stardom. 1 shall inherit Broadway. Sic venit Gloria Mundi. Cliff McGowan and Mac McGowan were cousins. They lived on the West Side and were talented. Singing, dancing, imitations, trick bicycle riding, boxing, German and Irish dialect comedy, and a little sleight of hand and balancing of wheat straws and wheelbarrows on the ends of their chins came as easy to them as it is for you to fix your rat so it won't show, or to dodge a creditor through the swinging doors of a well-lighted café. Courting, as you may belong to the one or the other division of the greatest prestidigitators, the people. They were slim, pale, consummately self-possessed youths, whose fingernails were always irreproachably, and clothes seems reproachfully, shiny. Their conversation was in sentences so short that they made Kipling's seem as long as court citations. Having the temperament, they did no work. Any afternoon you could find them on 8th Avenue either in front of Spinelli's barbershop, Mike Dugan's place, or the Limerick Hotel, rubbing their forefingernails with dingy silk handkerchiefs. At any time, if you had happened to be standing, undecisive, near a pool table and Cliff and Mac had, casually, as it were, drawn near, mentioning something disinterestedly about a game, well, indeed, would it have been for you had you gone your way, unresponsive, which assertion, carefully considered, is a study in tense, punctuation, and advice to strangers. Of all kinships it is likely that the closest is that of cousin. Between cousins there exist the ties of race, name, and favor ties thicker than water, and yet not coagulated with the jealous precipitations of brotherhood or the enjoining obligations of the matrimonial yoke. You can bestow upon a cousin almost the interest and affection that you would give to a stranger. You need not feel toward him the contempt and embarrassment that you have for one of your father's sons. It is the closer clan feeling that sometimes makes the branch of a tree stronger than its trunk. Thus were the two McGowans bonded. They enjoyed a quiet celebrity in their district, which was a strip west of 8th Avenue with the Pump for its pivot. Their talents were praised in 100 joints. Their friendship was famed even in a neighborhood where men had been known to fight off the wives of their friends when domestic onslaught was being made upon their friends by the wives of their friends. Thus do the limitations of English force us to repetens. So, side by side, grim, sallow, lowering, inseparable, undefeated, the cousins fought their way into the temple of art with a big A, which causes to intervene a lesson in geometry. One night at about 11 o'clock, Del Delano dropped into Mike's place on 8th Avenue. From that moment, instead of remaining a place, the cafe became a resort. It was as though King Edward had condescended to mingle with 10 spots of a different suit, or Joe Gans had casually strolled in to look over the Tuskegee School, or Mr. Shaw, of England, had accepted an invitation to read selections from Rena, the Snowbird, at an unveiling of the proposed monument to James Owen O'Connor at Chinkapin Falls, Mississippi. In spite of these comparisons, you will have to be told why the patronizing of a third-rate saloon on the west side by the said Del Delano conferred such a specific honor upon the place. Del Delano could not make his feet behave, and so the world paid him $300 a week to see them misconduct themselves on the vaudeville stage. To make the matter plain to you, and to swell the number of words, he was the best fancy dancer on any of the circuits between Ottawa and Corpus Christi. With his eyes fixed on vacancy and his feet apparently fixed on nothing, he nightly charmed thousands, as his press agent incorrectly stated. Even taking night performance and matinee together, he scarcely could have charmed more than 1,800, including those who left after Zora, the Notch girl, had squeezed herself through a hoop 12 inches in diameter, and those who were waiting for the moving pictures. But Del Delano was the West Side's favorite, and nowhere is there a more loyal side. 5 years before our story was submitted to the editors, Del had crawled from some 10th Avenue basement like a lean rat and had bitten his way into the Big Cheese. Patched, half-starved, cuffless, and as scornful of the hook as an interpreter of Ibsen, he had danced his way into health as you and I view it, and fame in 16 minutes on Amateur Night at Creary's Variety Theater in 8th Avenue. A bookmaker, one of the kind that talent wins with instead of losing, sat in the audience, asleep, dreaming of an impossible pickup among the amateurs. After a snore, a glass of beer from the handsome waiter, and a temporary blindness caused by the diamonds of a transmontane blonde in Box E, the bookmaker woke up long enough to engage Del Delano for a 3 weeks trial engagement fused with a train dog short circuit covering the 3 Washington's Heights, Statue, and Square. By the time this story was read and accepted, Del Delano was drawing his $300 a week, which, divided by 7, Sunday acts not in costume being permissible, dispels the delusion entertained by most of us that we have seen better days. You can easily imagine the worshipful agitation of 8th Avenue whenever Del Delano honored it with a visit after his Terpsichorean act in a historically great and vilely ventilated Broadway theater. If the West Side could claim 42 minutes out of his 42 weeks bookings every year, it was an occasion for bonfires and repainting of the pump. And now you know why Mike's Saloon is a resort and no longer a simple place. Del Delano entered Mike's alone, so nearly concealed in a fur-lined overcoat and a derby 2 sizes too large for him was Prince Lightfoot that you saw of his face only his pale, hatchet-edged features and a pair of unwinking, cold, light blue eyes. Nearly every man lounging at Mike's bar recognized the renowned product of the West Side. To those who did not, wisdom was conveyed by prodding elbows and growls of one-sided introduction. Upon Charlie, one of the bartenders, both fame and fortune descended simultaneously. He had once been honored by shaking hands with the great Delano at a 7th Avenue boxing bout. So with lungs of brass he now cried, "Hello, Del, old man. What'll it be?" Mike, the proprietor, who was cranking the cash register, heard. On the next day he raised Charlie's wages 5 a week. Del Delano drank a pony beer, paying for it carelessly out of his nightly earnings of $42.85 and 5/7C. He nodded amiably but coldly at the long line of Mike's patrons and strolled past then into the rear room of the cafe, for he heard in their sounds pertaining to his own art the light, stirring staccato of a buck and wing dance. In the back room Mac McGowan was giving a private exhibition of the genius of his feat. A few young men sat at tables looking on critically while they amused themselves seriously with beer. They nodded approval at some new fancy steps of Mac's own invention. At the sight of the great Del Delano, the amateur's feet stuttered, blundered, clicked a few times, and ceased to move. The tongues of one's shoes become tied in the presence of the master. Mac's sallow face took on a slight flush. From the uncertain cavity between Del Delano's hat brim and the lapels of his high fur coat collar came a thin puff of cigarette smoke and then a voice. "Do that last step over again, kid, and don't hold your arms quite so stiff. Now then." Once more Mac went through his paces. According to the traditions of the man-dancer, his entire being was transformed into mere feet and legs. His gaze and expression became cataleptic, his body, unbending above the waist, but as light as a cork, bobbed like the same cork dancing on the ripples of a running brook. The beat of his heels and toes pleased you like a snare drum obligato. The performance ended with an amazing clatter of leather against wood that culminated in a sudden, flat-footed stamp, leaving the dancer erect and as motionless as a pillar of the colonial portico of a mansion in a Kentucky prohibition town. Mac felt that he had done his best, and that Del Delano would turn his back upon him in derisive scorn. An approximate silence followed, broken only by the mewing of a cafe cat and the hubbub and uproar of a few million citizens and transportation facilities outside. Mac turned a hopeless but nervy eye upon Del Delano's face. In it he read disgust, admiration, envy, indifference, approval, disappointment, praise, and contempt. Thus, in the countenances of those we hate or love we find what we most desire or fear to see, which is an assertion equaling in its wisdom and chiaroscuro the most famous sayings of the most foolish philosophers that the world has ever known. Del Delano retired within his overcoat and hat. In 2 minutes he emerged and turned his left side to Mac. Then he spoke. "You've got a foot movement, kid, like a baby hippopotamus trying to sidestep a jab from a hummingbird. and you hold yourself like a truck driver, having his picture taken in a Third Avenue photograph gallery. And you haven't got any method or style. And your knees are about as limber as a couple of Yale passkeys. And you strike the eye as weighing, let us say, 450 pounds while you work. But say, would you mind giving me your name? McGowan, said the humbled amateur, Mac McGowan. Delano the Great slowly lighted a cigarette and continued, through its smoke. In other words, you're rotten. You can't dance. But I'll tell you one thing you've got. Throw it all off of your system while you're at it, said Mac. What VEI got? Genius, said Delano. Except myself, it's up to you to be the best fancy dancer in the United States, Europe, Asia, and the colonial possessions of all three. Smoke up, said Mac McGowan. Genius, repeated the master. You've got a talent for genius. Your brains are in your feet, where a dancer's ought to be. You've been self-taught until you're almost ruined, but not quite. What you need is a trainer. I'll take you in hand and put you at the top of the profession. There's room there for the two of us. You may beat me, said the master, casting upon him a cold, savage look combining so much rivalry, affection, justice, and human hate that it stamped him at once as one of the little great ones of the earth. You may beat me, but I doubt it. I've got the start and the pull, but at the top is where you belong. Your name, you say, is Robinson? McGowan, repeated the amateur, Mac McGowan. It don't matter, said Delano. Suppose you walk up to my hotel with me. I'd like to talk to you. Your footwork is the worst I ever saw, Madigan, but well, I'd like to talk to you. You may not think so, but I'm not so stuck up. I came off of the West Side myself. That overcoat cost me $800, but the collar ain't so high but what I can see over it. I taught myself to dance, and I put in most of 9 years at it before I shook a foot in public. But I had genius. I didn't go too far wrong in teaching myself as you've done. You've got the rottenest method and style of anybody I ever saw. Oh, I don't think much of the few little steps I take, said Mac, with hypocritical lightness. Don't talk like a package of self-raising buckwheat flour, said Delano. You've had a talent handed to you by the proposition higher up, and it's up to you to do the proper thing with it. I'd like to have you go up to my hotel for a talk, if you will. In his rooms in the King Clovis Hotel, Delano put on a scarlet housecoat bordered with gold braid and set out Apollinaris and a box of sweet crackers. Mac's eye wandered. Forget it, said Delaware. Drink and tobacco may be all right for a man who makes his living with his hands, but they won't do if you're depending on your head or your feet. If one end of you gets tangled, so does the other. That's why beer and cigarettes don't hurt piano players and picture painters. But you've got to cut him out if you want to do mental or pedal work. Now, have a cracker, and then we'll talk some. All right, said Mac. I take it as an honor, of course, for you to notice my hopping around. Of course I'd like to do something in a professional line. Of course I can sing a little and do card tricks and Irish and German comedy stuff. And of course I'm not so bad on the trapeze and comic bicycle stunts and Hebrew monologues and— One moment, interrupted Delano. Before we begin, I said you couldn't dance. Well, that wasn't quite right. You've only got 2 or 3 bad tricks in your method. You're handy with your feet, and you belong at the top, where I am. I'll put you there. I've got 6 weeks continuous in New York, and in 4 I can shape up your style till the booking agents will fight one another to get you. And I'll do it too. I'm from, and for the West Side. Delano looks good on billboards, but the family name's Crowley. Now, Macintosh McGowan, I mean you've got your chance 50 times a better one than I had. I'd be a shine to turn it down, said Mac, and I hope you understand I appreciate it. Me and my cousin Cliff McGowan was thinking of getting a tryout at Creary's on amateur night a month from tomorrow. Good stuff, said Delano. I got mine there. Junius T. Rollins, the booker for Coon and Amp, Dooley, jumped on the stage and engaged me after my dance. And the boards were an inch deep in nickels and dimes and quarters. There wasn't but 9 penny pieces found in the lot. I ought to tell you, said Mac, after 2 minutes of pensiveness, that my cousin Cliff can beat me dancing. We've always been what you might call pals. If you take him up instead of me, now, it might be better. He's invented a lot of steps that I can't cut. Forget it, said Delano. Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, and Saturdays of every week from now till amateur night. A month off. I'll coach you. I'll make you as good as I am. And nobody could do more for you. My act's over every night at 10:15. Half an hour later, I'll take you up and drill you till 12. I'll put you at the top of the bunch, right where I am. You've got talent. Your style's bum, but you've got the genius. You let me manage it. I'm from the West Side myself, and I'd rather see one of the same gang win out before I would an East Sider, or any of the Flatbush or Hackensack Meadow kind of butt-inners. I'll see that Junius Rollins is present on your Friday night, and if he don't climb over the footlights and offer you $50 a week as a starter, I'll let you draw it down from my own salary every Monday night. Now, am I talking on the level or am I not? Amateur night at Creary's 8th Avenue Theater is cut by the same pattern as amateur nights elsewhere. After the regular performance, the humblest talent may, by previous arrangement with the management, make its debut upon the public stage. Ambitious non-professionals, mostly self-instructed, display their skill and powers of entertainment along the broadest lines. They may sing, dance, mimic, juggle, contort, recite, or disport themselves along any of the ragged boundary lines of art. From the ranks of these anxious tyros are chosen the professionals that adorn or otherwise make conspicuous the full-blown stage. Press agents delight in recounting to open-mouthed and close-eared reporters stories of the humble beginnings of the brilliant stars whose orbits they control. Such and such a prima donna, they will tell you, made her initial bow to the public while turning handsprings on an amateur night. One great matinee favorite made his debut on a generous Friday evening singing coon songs of his own composition. A tragedian famous on 2 continents and an island first attracted attention by an amateur impersonation of a newly landed Scandinavian peasant girl. One Broadway comedian that turns Emma Way got a booking on a Friday night by reciting, seriously, the graveyard scene in Hamlet. Thus they get their chance. Amateur night is a kindly boon. It is charity divested of almsgiving. It is a brotherly hand reached down by members of the best united band of co-workers in the world to raise up less fortunate ones without labeling them beggars. It gives you the chance, if you can grasp it, to step for a few minutes before some badly painted scenery and, during the playing by the orchestra of some 10 or 12 bars of music, and while the soles of your shoes may be clearly holding to the uppers, to secure a salary equal to a congressman's or any Orthodox minister's. Could an ambitious student of literature or financial methods get a chance like that by spending 20 minutes in a Carnegie library? I do not trow so. But shall we look in at Creary's? Let us say that the specific Friday night had arrived on which the fortunate Mac McGowan was to justify the flattering predictions of his distinguished patron and, incidentally, drop his silver talent into the slit of the slot machine of fame and fortune that gives up reputation and dough. I offer, sure of your acquiescence, that we now forswear hypocritical philosophy and bigoted comment, permitting the story to finish itself in the dress of material allegations, a medium more worthy, when held to the line, than the most laborious creations of the word milliners. Page of O. Henry's manuscript missing here. Easily among the wings with his patron, the great Del Delano. For, whatever footlights shone in the city that would be amused, the freedom of their unshaded side was Dell's. And if he should take up an amateur, see, and bring him around, see, and, winking one of his cold blue eyes, say to the manager, "Take it from me he's got the good see," you wouldn't expect that amateur to sit on an unpainted bench sudorifically awaiting his turn, would you? So Mac strolled around largely with the nonpareil, and the 7 waited, clammily, on the bench. A giant in shirt sleeves, with a grim, kind face in which many stitches had been taken by surgeons from time to time, i.e., with a long stick, looped at the end. He was the man with the hook, the manager, with his close-smoothed blonde hair, his one-sided smile, and his abnormally easy manner, pored with patient condescension over the difficult program of the amateurs. The last of the professional turns, the grand march of the Happy Huzzard, had been completed. The last wrinkle and darn of their blue silkoline cotton tights had vanished from the stage. The man in the orchestra who played the kettle drum, cymbals, triangle, sandpaper, wang doodle, hoofbeats, and catcalls, and fired the pistol shots, had wiped his brow. The illegal holiday of the Romans had arrived. While the orchestra plays the famous waltz from The Dismal Wife, let us bestow 200 words upon the psychology of the audience. The orchestra floor was filled by people. The boxes contained persons. In the galleries was the foreordained verdict. The claque was there as it had originated in the Stone Age and was afterward adapted by the French. Every Mickey and Maggie who sat upon Creary's amateur bench, wise beyond their talents, knew that their success or doom lay already meted out to them by that crowded, whistling, roaring mass of Romans in the three galleries. They knew that the winning or the losing of the game for each one lay in the strength of the gang aloft that could turn the applause to its favorite. On a Broadway first night, a wooer of fame may win it from the ticket buyers over the heads of the cognoscenti. But not so at Creary's. The amateur's fate is arithmetical. The number of his supporting admirers present at his tryout decides it in advance. But how these outlying Friday nights put to a certain shame the Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, Saturdays, and matinees of the Broadway stage you should know. Here the manuscript ends. The Unknown Quantity, by O. Henry. The poet Longfellow, or was it Confucius, the inventor of wisdom, remarked, "Life is real, life is earnest, and things are not what they seem." As mathematics are or is, thanks, old subscriber, the only just rule by which questions of life can be measured, let us, by all means, adjust our theme to the straight edge and the balanced column of the great goddess 2 and 2 makes 4. Figures unassailable sums in addition shall be set over against whatever opposing element there may be. A mathematician, after scanning the above 2 lines of poetry, would say, "Ahem, young gentlemen, if we assume that x plus, that is, that life is real, then things, all of which life includes, are real. Anything that is real is what it seems. Then if we consider the proposition that things are not what they seem, why? But this is heresy, and not poesy. We woo the sweet nymph algebra. We would conduct you into the presence of the elusive, seductive, pursued, satisfying, mysterious X. Not long before the beginning of this century, Septimus Kinsolving, an old New Yorker, invented an idea. He originated the discovery that bread is made from flour and not from wheat futures. Perceiving that the flour crop was short and that the stock exchange was having no perceptible effect on the growing wheat, Mr. Kinsolving cornered the flour market. The result was that when you or my landlady, before the war, she never had to turn her hand to anything. Southerners accommodated, bought a 5-cent loaf of bread, you laid down an additional 2 cents, which went to Mr. Kinsolving as a testimonial to his perspicacity. A second result was that Mr. Kinsolving quit the game with $2 million profit off. Mr. Kinsolving's son Dan was at college when the mathematical experiment in breadstuffs was made. Dan came home during vacation and found the old gentleman in a red dressing gown reading Little Dorrit on the porch of his estimable red brick mansion in Washington Square. He had retired from business with enough extra 2-cent pieces from bread buyers to reach, if laid side by side, 15 times around the earth and lap as far as the public debt of Paraguay. Dan shook hands with his father and hurried over to Greenwich Village to see his old high school friend, Kinwitz. Dan had always admired Kinwitz. Kinwitz was pale, curly-haired, intense, serious, mathematical, studious, altruistic, socialistic, and the natural foe of oligarchies. Kinwitz had foregone college and was learning watchmaking in his father's jewelry store. Dan was smiling, jovial, easy-tempered, and tolerant alike of kings and ragpickers. The two foregathered joyously, being opposites. And then Dan went back to college and Kinwitz to his mainsprings and to his private library in the rear of the jewelry shop. 4 years later, Dan came back to Washington Square with the accumulations of B.A. and 2 years of Europe thick upon him. He took a filial look at Septimus Kinsolving's elaborate tombstone in Greenwood and a tedious excursion through typewritten documents with the family lawyer. And then, feeling himself a lonely and hopeless millionaire, hurried down to the old jewelry store across 6th Avenue. Kinwitz unscrewed a magnifying glass from his eye, routed out his parent from a dingy rear room, and abandoned the interior of watches for outdoors. He went with Dan, and they sat on a bench in Washington Square. Dan had not changed much. He was stalwart and had a dignity that was inclined to relax into a grin. Kinwitz was more serious, more intense, more learned, philosophical and socialistic. I know about it now, said Dan finally. I pumped it out of the imminent legal lights that turned over to me poor old Dad's collections of bonds and boodle. It amounts to $2 million, Kin, and I am told that he squeezed it out of the chaps that pay their pennies for loaves of bread at little bakeries around the corner. You've studied economics, Dan, and you know all about monopolies, and the masses, and octopuses, and the rights of laboring people. I never thought about those things before. Football, and trying to be white to my fellow man were about the extent of my college curriculum. But since I came back and found out how Dad made his money, I've been thinking, I'd like awfully well to pay back those chaps who had to give up too much money for bread. I know it would buck the line of my income for a good many yards, but I'd like to make it square with them. Is there any way it can be done? Old ways and means? Kinwitz's big black eyes glowed fierily. His thin, intellectual face took on almost a sardonic cast. He caught Dan's arm with the grip of a friend and a judge. You can't do it, he said, emphatically. One of the chief punishments of you men of ill-gotten wealth is that when you do repent you find that you have lost the power to make reparation or restitution. I admire your good intentions, Dan, but you can't do anything. Those people were robbed of their precious pennies. It's too late to remedy the evil. You can't pay them back. Of course, said Dan, lighting his pipe. We couldn't hunt up every one of the duffers and hand him back the right change. There's an awful lot of 'em buying bread all the time. Funny taste they have. I never cared for bread especially, except for a toasted cracker with the Roquefort. But we might find a few of 'em and chuck some of Dad's cash back where it came from. I'd feel better if I could. It seems tough for people to be held up for a soggy thing like bread. One wouldn't mind standing a rise in broiled lobsters or deviled crabs. Get to work and think, Kin. I want to pay back all of that money I can. There are plenty of charities, said Kinwitz, mechanically. Easy enough, said Dan, in a cloud of smoke. I suppose I could give the city a park, or endow an asparagus bed in a hospital. But I don't want Paul to get away with the proceeds of the gold brick we sold Peter. It's the bread shorts I want to cover, Kin. The thin fingers of Kinwitz moved rapidly. Do you know how much money it would take to pay back the losses of consumers during that corner in flour? He asked. I do not, said Dan, stoutly. My lawyer tells me that I have 2 millions. If you had 100 millions, said Kinwitz vehemently, you couldn't repair 1,000th part of the damage that has been done. You cannot conceive of the accumulated evils produced by misapplied wealth. Each penny that was wrung from the lean purses of the poor reacted 1,000-fold to their harm. You do not understand. You do not see how hopeless is your desire to make restitution. Not in a single instance can it be done. Back up, philosopher, said Dan. The penny has no sorrow that the dollar cannot heal. Not in one instance, repeated Kinwitz. I will give you one, and let us see. Thomas Boyne had a little bakery over there in Varick Street. He sold bread to the poorest people. When the price of flour went up, he had to raise the price of bread. His customers were too poor to pay it. Boyne's business failed, and he lost his $1,000 capital, all he had in the world. Dan Kinsolving struck the park bench a mighty blow with his fist. I accept the instance, he cried. Take me to Boyne. I will repay his $1,000 and buy him a new bakery. Write your check, said Kinwitz without moving, and then begin to write checks in payment of the train of consequences. Draw the next one for $50,000. Boyne went insane after his failure and set fire to the building from which he was about to be evicted. The loss amounted to that much. Boyne died in an asylum. Stick to the instance, said Dan. I haven't noticed any insurance companies on my charity list. Draw your next check for $100,000, went on Kinwitz. Boyne's son fell into bad ways after the bakery closed and was accused of murder. He was acquitted last week after a 3-year legal battle, and the state draws upon taxpayers for that much expense. Back to the bakery, exclaimed Dan impatiently. The government doesn't need to stand in the bread line. The last item of the instance is, come and I will show you, said Kinwitz, rising. The socialistic watchmaker was happy. He was a millionaire baiter by nature and a pessimist by trade. Kinwitz would assure you in one breath that money was but evil and corruption, and that your brand new watch needed cleaning and a new ratchet wheel. He conducted Kinsolving southward out of the square and into ragged, poverty-haunted Varick Street. Up the narrow stairway of a squalid brick tenement, he led the penitent offspring of the octopus. He knocked on a door, and a clear voice called to them to enter. In that almost bare room a young woman sat sewing at a machine. She nodded to Kinwitz as to a familiar acquaintance. One little stream of sunlight through the dingy window burnished her heavy hair to the color of an ancient Tuscan shield. She flashed a rippling smile at Kinwitz and a look of somewhat flustered inquiry. Kinsolving stood regarding her clear and pathetic beauty in heart-throbbing silence. Thus they came into the presence of the last item of the instance. "How many this week, Miss Mary?" asked the watchmaker. A mountain of coarse gray shirts lay upon the floor. "Nearly 30 dozen," said the young woman cheerfully. "I've made almost $4. I'm improving, Mr. Kinwitz. I hardly know what to do with so much money." Her eyes turned, brightly soft, in the direction of Dan. A little pink spot came out on her round, pale cheek. Kinwitz chuckled like a diabolic raven. "Miss Boyne," he said, "let me present Mr. Kinsolving, the son of the man who put bread up 5 years ago. He thinks he would like to do something to aid those who were inconvenienced by that act." The smile left the young woman's face. She rose and pointed her forefinger toward the door. This time she looked Kinsolving straight in the eye, but it was not a look that gave delight. The two men went down Varick Street. Kinwitz, letting all his pessimism and rancor and hatred of the octopus come to the surface, jibed at the moneyed side of his friend in an acrid torrent of words. Dan appeared to be listening, and then turned to Kinwitz and shook hands with him warmly. "I'm obliged to you, Kin, old man," he said, vaguely, 1,000 times obliged. "Mein Gott, you are crazy," cried the watchmaker, dropping his spectacles for the first time in years. 2 months afterward Kinwitz went into a large bakery on Lower Broadway with a pair of gold-rimmed eyeglasses that he had mended for the proprietor. A lady was giving an order to a clerk as Kinwitz passed her. "These loaves are 10 cents, said the clerk. "I always get them at 8 cents uptown," said the lady. "You need not fill the order. I will drive by there on my way home." The voice was familiar. The watchmaker paused. "Mr. Kinwitz," cried the lady, heartily. "How do you do?" Kinwitz was trying to train his socialistic and economic comprehension on her wonderful fur boa and the carriage waiting outside. "Why, Miss Boyne," he began. "Mrs. Kinsolving," she corrected. "Dan and I were married a month ago."